No one showed up for my son's heart surgery. Not one familiar face in the white glare of that waiting room. The clock struck 6. The doors swallowed him, and I sat surrounded by strangers, holding hands that weren't mine to hold. Hours later, every family left with smiles except me. My chair stayed cold, my phone still silent. 3 days passed before the screen finally lit up. Need $5,000 for your sister's wedding dress. I sent 50 cents with one line, buy a veil. The next morning, the bank called, and that's when everything in our family cracked wide open. Before I tell you the rest, tell me where you're listening from, so I know I'm not alone. And when you've heard my story, tell me what you would have done in my place. The morning of Leo's surgery didn't feel real. The world outside the hospital looked ordinary. Coffee shops opening, people walking dogs, traffic humming along. But inside, everything was made of fluorescent light and antiseptic air. Leo's hand was small in mine as the nurses checked his bracelet, his chart, his IV. "Will it hurt?" he whispered. "Not while you're sleeping," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "And when you wake up, your heart will be stronger, like a superhero upgrade." He smiled at that, a quick, brave tilt of his mouth that made my chest ache more than anything the doctors had told me. They wheeled him toward the double doors. I walked beside the gurney until the red line on the floor told me I had to stop. The nurse touched my arm. "We'll take good care of him, Mom." I nodded, because if I opened my mouth, something fragile might shatter on the tile. The doors closed. That's when the silence started. In the waiting room, families had built little islands of comfort around themselves. Blankets, coffee cups, whispered prayers. Wives leaned on husbands. Parents held hands. Someone passed around muffins in a plastic container, their laughter too loud for a place like this. But I envied the sound anyway. My island was a single chair and a styrofoam cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it. My phone lay face up on my thigh. Every time the screen stayed dark, it felt like a verdict. They all knew. My parents, my siblings. I had texted the group chat twice the night before. "Check-in is at 5:15 a.m. Surgery starts at 6. It's a big one this time. I'm scared." No one replied I'll be there, but no one said I won't either. That silence had always been the easiest lie in our family. I told myself they were coming late. Maybe traffic. Maybe work. Maybe they'd slide in just before the doctor came out with news, and we'd all exhale together. But hours passed, and the only people who sat down beside me were strangers asking to borrow the outlet to charge their phones. A nurse walked out at one point and called a different last name. That family surged to their feet. Arms, coats, whispered, "Thank gods," all rising at once. I watched them leave with their bandaged loved one, their relief filling the space they vacated. My chair stayed cold. My phone stayed silent. At some point, I stopped checking the clock and stared instead at the pattern in the linoleum, as if I could fall into it and avoid thinking about the fact that my son was on a table somewhere with his chest open, and no one from my bloodline cared enough to sit with me. When the surgeon finally came out, his expression was tired but kind. "He did well," he said. "The repair went smoothly. He's a strong kid." I gripped the edge of my chair to keep from collapsing. "Thank you," I whispered, the words scraping out of a throat too dry. He asked if I had someone to call, someone to update. I lied. "Yes, I'll let them know." I didn't. That night back home, the house didn't feel like a home at all. Leo slept on the couch where I could watch his chest rise and fall. His breaths were careful, shallow, as if he was afraid of making too much movement and tearing the day wide open again. The first day passed, then the second, then the third. My phone stayed dark on the counter, a small black rectangle that weighed as much as a stone. On the third evening, as soup simmered on the stove and the air purifier hummed in the corner, my phone buzzed 3 times. The sound sliced through the quiet. I almost smiled. "Maybe Mom. Maybe how's Leo? Maybe, we're so sorry we couldn't be there." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up the phone. "Need $5,000 for your sister's wedding dress. Everyone's contributing by Friday." Steam from the pot fogged my glasses. I read it again. Slowly this time, as if the words might change. They didn't. "No, how's Leo? No, how are you holding up? Just numbers." A deadline. A statement that assumed I would say yes, like I always had. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't cry. Something colder than tears settled in my chest. I opened my banking app. My emergency fund stared back at me. The same one I'd built out of overtime shifts, canceled vacations, saying no to small pleasures so I could say yes when life turned dangerous. I tapped transfer, entered 050. In the memo line, I wrote, buy a veil. The confirmation sound was absurdly gentle, a little digital chime that sounded almost cheerful. I turned the phone off and set it down screen down, like burying something. The next morning, the bank called. I didn't become the responsible one overnight. I was trained into it, one quiet dismissal at a time. Growing up, Love in Our House had a schedule, and it never ran on my time. When I brought home straight A's in middle school, I remember holding the report card out to my mother like it was a bouquet. She glanced at it, smiled faintly, and said, "That's good, honey, but don't brag. Ava gets sensitive." When I fixed the leaky faucet under the kitchen sink at 16, lying on my back with my arms wedged into the cabinet, my dad clapped me on the shoulder after and said to my mom, "See? Told you I'd take care of it." I learned early that peace came cheaper than recognition. It cost less to swallow the small hurts than to point them out and be told I was too much or too dramatic. When Ava cried because she lost a necklace, my mother turned the whole house upside down. Couch cushions flew, drawers emptied, laundry baskets overturned. When I misplaced my science trophy, I got a sigh and, "Stop being dramatic, Claire. It's just a thing." Sometimes I wondered if I was just a thing, too. I became the one who did the dishes without being asked, who remembered to pay the electric bill when Dad forgot, who watched Ava's mood like a weather report so I could carry an umbrella for her storms. In college, while Ava bounced from major to major and boyfriend to boyfriend, I worked 2 part-time jobs and kept my GPA high enough to make the dean's list. When I finally landed my first steady job at the hospital, I called my mom, nervous and proud. "You're lucky to have it, honey," she said. "Maybe you can help Ava get started with her business." Ava didn't have a business. She had an idea and a Pinterest board. "Sure," I said, because that's what I always said. The conversation that sealed everything didn't feel like a turning point at the time. It felt like any other night at my small kitchen table. Mom and Dad sat across from me, hands folded like they were about to pray. The coffee between us went from steaming to lukewarm as they circled their request. "It would just make things easier if we had access to your savings," Mom finally said. "You know, in case of emergencies. Family helps family." I hesitated. "You mean, like a joint account?" "Not exactly," Dad said, smiling in that reassuring way he kept for neighbors and waitresses. "You keep it in your name. We just have authorization, so if something happens, we can move quickly. You're always so organized, Claire. We'd never touch a cent unless it was necessary." Unless it was necessary. That word did a lot of heavy lifting in our family. A more suspicious version of me might have asked what counted as necessary. But suspicion didn't get rewarded when I was a kid. Compliance did. So I signed. They left with papers in hand, calling me their responsible girl. I stood at the sink afterward, staring at the coffee cups they'd left behind. Rings of brown clung to the inside. I rinsed them out and told myself it was no big deal. It was still my money. My name on the account. They just had options. Emergencies, it turned out, looked like a broken dishwasher at their house, a vacation deposit they couldn't miss. The deal is so good. A bridal shower fund for Ava. Each withdrawal came with a text that felt more like a receipt than gratitude. "You're a lifesaver. Couldn't do this without you." Never a call, never a visit. The emergencies flowed one way, from my account to their lives. Leo's needs, my rent, my future, felt like footnotes to their main story. When Ava talked about how Mom always believed in me, I smiled and nodded. When Dad told people, "Both our girls are doing great," I stood there with my plastic cup at barbecues and wondered why it felt like only one of us had assigned seating at the table. The last time I saw them before Leo's surgery, we were at Sunday dinner. Ava held court at the head of the conversation, flipping through photos on her phone of cake tastings and centerpiece mock-ups. "It has to be perfect," she said. "This is the event of the year." Mom leaned in, glowing. "It will be. We'll make sure of it." Dad talked about the venue's open bar. Caleb cracked jokes about his speech and how he'd roast Ava just enough to be funny without getting disowned. No one asked about Leo's condition. Not once. The word surgery didn't leave anyone's mouth but mine, and even then, only in passing when I mentioned taking some days off. Mom hummed vaguely, "You'll figure it out, honey. You always do." I passed the mashed potatoes, pretending not to notice, pretending I didn't care. But I did. I always did. After they left that night, the house felt hollow. I sat at the kitchen counter with Leo's medical folder spread out in front of me. Appointment dates, pre-op instructions, consent forms. My pen moved over checkboxes while my heart counted backward from a fear I couldn't name. My phone buzzed. A message in the family group chat lit the screen. Ava's dress fitting tomorrow. Can everyone pitch in for the final payment? I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I flipped it over and went back to my forms. I showed up, even when they didn't, especially when they didn't. I just hadn't realized yet that one day, showing up for myself would mean stepping away from them. 3 days after the surgery, the house felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. The air purifier hummed in the corner, a low, constant sound. The clock on the wall clicked from minute to minute with stubborn determination. Every noise seemed magnified because there were so few of them. Leo slept on the couch, propped up with pillows, a knit blanket pulled up to his chin. The blanket still smelled faintly like the hospital, antiseptic and laundry detergent, tinged with something metallic I'd rather not name. His chest rose carefully, each breath measured and deliberate. I moved through the kitchen like I was afraid to disturb the fragile peace we'd been granted. The soup simmering on the stove bubbled softly. I kept the TV volume low, the lights dim, my movements quiet. My phone sat face down on the counter, no missed calls. No messages, no knock on the door with a casserole dish and a half-hearted, "How's he doing?" I had told them. They knew the date, the time, the risk. They knew the words, open heart surgery and complications and recovery window. They promised they'd try to come by or definitely check in. They didn't. When the timer on the stove beeped, I turned off the burner. The sharp little sound broke through the stillness, and almost on cue, my phone buzzed. 3 short vibrations, 1 message. My first thought, ridiculous in hindsight, was that they had finally remembered, that maybe the guilt had sunk in, maybe someone wanted to see if Leo was okay. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, picked up the phone, and flipped it over. "Mom, need $5,000 for your sister's wedding dress. Everyone's contributing by Friday." The words arranged themselves on the screen in a tidy gray bubble. For a second, my brain refused to process them. I read it again, slower, waiting for my eyes to catch some missing phrase. "How's Leo? How are you holding up? Is he in pain? Do you need help with groceries, with bills?" None of that was there. "Just need $5,000. By Friday." The steam from the pot fogged my glasses. I blinked it away, but the film over my vision didn't clear. Something had slid out of place inside my chest, and now every beat of my heart felt slightly crooked. I didn't answer. I didn't throw the phone, didn't scream, didn't cry. I just set it down, slowly, like it was something fragile I might still decide to keep. Later that night, after Leo had coughed himself into an uneasy sleep and the apartment was draped in the amber glow of a single lamp, I sat at the kitchen counter again. The medical folder lay open in front of me. Discharge papers, prescription instructions, follow-up appointment details, all the things I kept organized because no one else ever did. I flipped my phone over. The message from my mother still sat there, unbothered by the hours that had passed. I opened our old text thread and scrolled back, searching for some piece of evidence that I was exaggerating. Some memory that would prove I was being unfair, too harsh, too sensitive. Most of the messages were logistics. "What time is dinner Sunday? Can you watch Ava's dog this weekend? We need a little help this month, honey. We'll pay you back soon." Photos of Ava in white dresses, laughing with cake samples, posing in venues with chandeliers and floral arches. No pictures of Leo in hospital gowns. No selfies of my exhausted face under fluorescent lights. For years, I had called this silence busy. I had called it not wanting to be a burden. I had told myself that not being thought of was better than being resented. But standing there with my hands braced on the counter and my son's heartbeat still echoing in my ears, the truth settled like ice in my lungs. It wasn't that they forgot, it was that they chose not to remember. I opened my banking app. My emergency fund blinked up at me. A row of numbers I could translate into hours of overtime. Nights I'd worked instead of sleeping. Weekends I'd spent on the floor with Leo's toys while answering emails one-handed. The same account my parents had access to. 4 emergencies. Broken dishwasher, emergency. Vacation deposit, emergency. Rehearsal dinner costs, emergency. Leo's open heart surgery, not even worthy of a text. My thumb hovered over the transfer icon. For a moment, I considered doing what I'd always done, sighing, sending the money, telling myself that at least this way, there would be no fight. At least this way, I could keep the fragile illusion of family intact. Then Leo coughed in his sleep. A small, ragged sound that made me turn my head automatically, counting the seconds between breaths. I tapped transfer, entered 050. In the memo line, I typed, buy a veil. The absurdity of it made me snort softly. Not quite a laugh. More like a sound that had been trapped in my chest for years and finally found a crack to escape through. The confirmation chime sounded, a tiny digital bell, soft and final. There was no satisfaction yet. No rush of triumph, just a strange stillness. Like the air right after a storm when the trees are still dripping but the thunder has given up. I turned my phone off and slid it under a stack of papers. Then I turned off the lamp, walked to the couch, and sat beside Leo. I watched his chest rise and fall, the faint outline of the bandage visible under his pajama top. I placed my hand over his heart, not to check anything medical, just to remind myself that this was what mattered. Not centerpieces, not dresses, not being the responsible girl who never said no. Can we visit Grandma when I get better? Leo murmured, half asleep. I swallowed. Not right now, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice calm. They're busy with wedding stuff. He hummed drowsily in acceptance. It took him less time to accept that answer than it had taken me to admit it to myself. When he drifted fully into sleep, I stood and walked back to the table. I pulled my laptop toward me and opened it. The login screen glowed pale blue in the dark. I typed my password and went straight to account settings. The cursor blinked, waiting. Remove joint access. Click. Confirm removal for Linda Whitman. Click. Confirm removal for Gerald Whitman. Change password. Enable two-step verification. Save. The printer hummed to life as I printed the confirmation page. I folded it in half and slid it into a manila folder. On the tab, in neat blue ink, I wrote, Access removed. I didn't know it then, but that was the night my silence stopped being surrender and started becoming structure. The next morning smelled like toast and coffee instead of antiseptic and fear. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, making stripes on the kitchen table. Leo sat at the table in his pajamas, drawing rockets on the back of an envelope while I buttered his toast. His movements were still a little slow, but his eyes were brighter. Can we make pancakes tomorrow? He asked. Of course, I said. We'll make a whole galaxy of them. My phone, resurrected from its burial under paperwork, lay face up on the counter. For a few hours, it behaved like any other device. Notifications from pharmacy apps, appointment reminders, a promotional email about a sale I wasn't going to shop. Around mid-morning, it rang. Unknown number. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in my stomach twisted. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. Hello? Ms. Whitman, this is Ethan Cole from Pacific Union Bank. My spine straightened. Yes. His voice was courteous, measured, the practiced tone of someone who was used to dealing with people at their worst moments. Your mother is here in my office, he said. She says she's having trouble accessing an account you share. She's quite upset. Of course she was. There is no shared account, I said, keeping my voice even. There is a savings account in my name. She was an authorized user. That authorization has been revoked. A pause crackled softly over the line. Understood, he said. She's insisting it's a family fund, not an individual account. It's my savings, I replied. Every deposit in that account came from my paychecks. There is nothing to dispute. Through the receiver, I could hear muffled voices, my mother's pitch rising, sharp and familiar, even through walls and distance. Tell her she can't just take our money. Tell her. Mr. Cole's voice cut gently over the noise. Would you like me to explain the policy to her, Ms. Whitman? Yes, I said. Then after a beat, and please note the time of this call in your records. He hesitated, not in resistance, but in recognition, like he understood this wasn't just about banking. Of course, he said. There was a faint clatter as he adjusted the phone, then a soft click as he put me on hold or transferred lines. I set my own phone down on the table and exhaled slowly. The clock on the wall ticked. In the living room, Leo hummed to himself as he drew stars around his rocket ships. The ordinary sounds of my small life filled the space where my family's noise used to be. An hour later, someone pounded on my front door. The knock was hard, impatient. The kind that assumed the person inside owed you their immediate attention. I knew that knock. Mom's in tears, Caleb said when I opened the door just a fraction, the chain lock still latched. His hands were shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched like he wasn't sure if he was cold or just uncomfortable. She says you froze her account, he continued. It's my account, I said quietly. He frowned. She said it was family money. It's not, I replied. Every dollar in there came from my work, my overtime, my missed vacations. Family may have used it, but they didn't earn it. Caleb shifted, guilt flickering across his face like a faulty light bulb. You could have told us how serious it was, he said. About Leo. We didn't know it was like that. I met his eyes. I did tell you, I said. You just didn't want to hear it. Heart surgery didn't fit between cake tastings and venue tours, I guess. He flinched just a little. Mom said you sent her 50 cents, he said after a beat. Why would you do that? Because that's exactly what her concern was worth, I answered. For a second, he just stared at me like I was someone he used to know from far away. A childhood friend, seen in a grocery store aisle after 20 years. Familiar and strange at the same time. You're destroying this family, Claire, he said, voice low. No, I replied, my pulse steady in a way it had never been during these conversations before. I'm just not funding it anymore. He didn't slam the door when he left. He just walked away, shoulders hunched, hands still in his pockets. Somehow, the soft click of the door closing felt louder than any slam could have. By evening, my missed call list was a catalog of numbers I didn't want to dial back. Unknowns, landlines. Once my parents' house number, twice Ava's. I let them all go. Instead, I opened my email. A message from the bank waited in my inbox. Access changes confirmed. All previous authorizations have been revoked. I read it once, then again, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to memorize the feeling that came with the words. The precise, quiet moment when control returned. I printed the email and slipped it into the folder behind the first confirmation pages. On the tab, I wrote a second word under access removed, proof. 2 days later, the doorbell rang again. This time, the knock that followed was sharp, staccato, angry. Claire. Open the door! You can't just ignore us! Ava. I opened the door just enough to see her, the chain still latched. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless despite the stress in her eyes. She looked like she was on a break from a bridal photo shoot. You skipped my son's heart surgery for cake tastings, I said before she could speak. Don't lecture me about what I can and can't do. That's not fair, she snapped. You know how busy things have been. You're being dramatic. There it was again. That word. The same one my mother used when I cried over being forgotten. I leaned my forehead briefly against the doorframe, then straightened. No, I said. What isn't fair is you asking for $5,000 3 days after his chest was opened, without a single text, asking if he survived the procedure. She pushed at the door, but the chain held. Her eyes flicked past me to the stack of papers on the table, the neatly labeled folders. You think freezing Mom's access fixes anything? She hissed. You've humiliated her. She's embarrassed at the bank. She's in tears. You made her look like a fool. She did that herself, I said quietly. All I did was log out. For a moment, neither of us spoke. You're destroying this family, she whispered, echoing Caleb's words. I thought about Leo's scar, the way it caught the lamplight at night. I thought about the empty waiting room, the cold chair, the silent phone, the broken dishwasher, the vacation deposits, the text asking for money without asking for me. No, I said again, my voice steady. I'm just not funding it anymore. Her throat worked, like she wanted to say something else, but no words came. Finally, she stepped back. She didn't slam the door when she left either, but when I slid the chain free and closed it fully, flipping the deadbolt, it felt like closing more than just wood and metal. By noon that day, the calls slowed. By 2, they stopped. In the kind of quiet that used to feel like abandonment, I heard something new. I heard room for my own thoughts, my own choices, my own life. 2 months can be a lifetime, or the blink of an eye, depending on what you've survived. In our case, it was both. The storm my family kicked up around my bank account passed faster than I expected. Maybe the bank making it clear they had no legal standing helped. Maybe they found another crisis to orbit. Maybe it was just harder to scream at a closed door than an open one. Whatever the reason, the calls stopped. The texts dwindled to nothing. The family group chat scrolled on without me. I muted it and stopped checking. Life found a new rhythm. Mornings smelled like pancakes and coffee instead of antiseptic and worry. Leo's scar faded from angry red to a soft, pale pink. Every now and then he'd lift his shirt and flex, asking, "Does it make me look tough now?" Tough and handsome, I'd say, kissing the top of his head. The folder in my desk drawer grew thicker, not with new crises, but with the remnants of the old ones. Bank confirmations, account statements, the authorization revocations. They were less like weapons and more like certificates that proved I'd graduated from a version of myself I never wanted to be again. One evening, near dusk, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Leo was in the living room, lying on his stomach with a comic book, feet kicking lazily in the air. The setting sun poured warm gold across the floor. On the doormat lay a plain envelope. No return address, just my name, written in my father's careful, slightly old-fashioned handwriting. I held it for a second, feeling the weight of it. It was light, but it carried years. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a letter, folded neatly once. "Claire," it began. "We were wrong." The words looked strange in his handwriting, like they belonged to someone else. The wedding wasn't an emergency. Leo's surgery was. "We chose wrong, and we hurt you both. This check isn't for you to cash. It's to remind you of the value we forgot. I don't expect forgiveness, only for you to know that I finally understand. Dad." I read it twice, then a third time. Not to test its sincerity, but to make sure my hands didn't shake the way they used to whenever my parents' names flashed on my phone. The check lay on the counter, the paper fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open window. The numbers stared up at me. $5,000 that had once been demanded like a due bill and now sat offered like, what? An apology? A confession? A receipt? "Who's it from?" Leo asked, padding into the kitchen barefoot, his favorite blanket bunched in his arms. "Grandpa," I said. "He wrote to say he's sorry." Leo frowned, processing that. "Does that mean we have to see them now?" The old Claire would have said yes before she even thought about it. She would have drawn up logistics, planned visits, smoothed awkwardness, tried to patch the cracks with her own skin. The new Claire thought for a moment. "No," I said softly. "It just means they're learning. We don't have to open the door until we're ready, or at all if that's what keeps us safe." He seemed satisfied with that, the simplicity of the answer fitting better in his world than the complicated tangle of adult history behind it. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow anyway?" he asked. I smiled. "Absolutely." After he went back to his comic, I folded the letter and slid it into the folder in my desk drawer, right behind the bank confirmations. Proof of two things: what had been taken from me, and what was finally mine again. I didn't cash the check. It stayed where I'd left it, tucked behind plastic and paper, slowly curling at the edges. Not worthless exactly, but not spendable either. More like a gravestone for a version of our family that had demanded more than it ever gave. I stood at the window and looked out at the street. Across the way, lights flicked on in other homes. Families moved behind curtains, silhouettes setting tables, reaching for each other, living lives that had nothing to do with mine. For the first time, I didn't feel excluded. I had chosen my absence. My phone lay face down on the table, no longer vibrating with demands dressed up as needs. The silence around it, around us, no longer scraped at my nerves. It felt earned. I used to think peace meant fixing everything that broke between us, that if I just gave enough, forgave enough, stayed quiet enough, one day my family would become what I needed. Now I know peace is what's left when you stop explaining yourself. When you recognize that family isn't a debt you keep paying, it's a choice you keep or let go. Some wounds don't need revenge. They need release. If this story hit close to home, stay for the next one. Tell me where you're watching from and what peace looks like to you. Because somewhere out there, someone is learning that silence can be the loudest answer of all.